Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 202, and we are going to take a look at the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. We have not discussed this one. We have discussed their law enforcement that is within their agency, but we have not actually covered this particular agency. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners because as usual, you guys are awesome. We love to see you here. And do check us out on YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment, and also if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, do email us as well at yourlaborlaws@gmail.com. Again, that's yourlaborlaws@gmail.com. Okay, so let me give a big shout out here. A big shout out to Oklahoma, California, New York, Virginia, Texas, Pennsylvania, British Columbia, Illinois, Oregon, West Virginia, Georgia, Indiana, Florida, Massachusetts, Ohio, Alabama, Minnesota, Washington, Colorado, District of Columbia, also known as DC. Let's see, we have New Jersey, Nebraska, Tennessee, Rhode Island, Kansas, North Carolina, Nevada, Mississippi, Maryland, Michigan, Iowa, Alberta, New Brunswick, Louisiana, Wisconsin, Connecticut, Manitoba, Hawaii, Newfoundland, and Labrador. In terms of countries, the United States, Canada, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, let's see, Australia, Slovakia, South Africa, Japan, Denmark, and Uzbekistan. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping here. I did look up Newfoundland and Labrador. It actually is a province within Canada. I did not know that. I knew about Newfoundland, but I did not know the entire name. So that actually is a place. It is the upper northeastern province of Canada. It is super way up there north and super cold. And they do have someone that they have elected to office in terms of being in charge of their province or representing it, I should say. And it's called the Office of the Premier. And it is the Honorable Andrew Furey or Fury. It's F-U-R-E-Y. Unfortunately, he is in the Liberal Progressive Party. And what's interesting is that he is a doctor. A very educated doctor. So I find this to be really odd whenever doctors are liberals and progressives because, you know, you would think that doctors would want the best possible medical care for their patients, but socialized medicine does not provide that type of medical care. So I always find it odd whenever doctors go along with liberalism and progressivism because, you know, those two ways of thinking greatly hinder healthcare and it raises taxes on people and it makes it very difficult for people to live their life. And this is why a lot of citizens from Canada either immigrate or they come to the United States to get medical care because the medical care that they're paying for via their taxes, they are denied access to because of their government. So what we will do once we go over more of the labor unions in the United States, which we are almost done with those, and then we will follow up on labor unions from Canada, because a lot of the labor unions that we have discussed here in the United States, some of them unfortunately have become international labor unions, and they have gotten in bed with Canada. And that's very unfortunate because Canada is socialist, and their Labor Party is very socialist, very weird, and they are not capitalist, they do not have a democracy, they do not believe in capitalism, and they do not believe in liberty or freedom. So if they do not believe in those things, then we should not be doing any type of business with them, especially in terms of our labor. And, you know, it's kind of hard to be a part of the same organization when your two countries are completely separate and completely different. So, you know, what we will do when we dive more into Canada and the ins and outs of it, we will go over the history of Canada because I personally don't know how Canada was founded. I do know that the French immigrated to Canada. I don't know when Canada actually became a country, but I do know the French heavily influenced it. I mean, not in terms of socialism, but, you know, the French people, they had the fur trade and the French trade in Canada. And so it's one of those things that's why a lot of Canadians speak French is because of the French immigrating there a long time ago. But I don't know when Canada became a country or when it became crazy socialist and they stupidly keep electing and re-electing Trudeau. And I think that's very unfortunate because he's just a career politician following in the footsteps of his father. So there's very much a lot of nepotism there. But we will discuss Canada in general and then dive into their history because it very much affects the United States whenever we do business with them or whenever our labor unions decide to be an international labor union. And Canadians are not like Americans. You know, there's nothing wrong with being Canadian or being American, but, you know, it's two totally different countries for a reason. And what's interesting is that Trudeau, he's more concerned about critical race theory and what pronouns you use as opposed to what's actually happening in his country and protecting his citizens. So he's very much a professional bureaucrat, and that's not a very good thing. Another thing I want to mention is that when I was talking about the Department of Defense the other day in regards to their Inspector General, I misquoted the budget of the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense, their annual budget, so basically yearly, monies they're given as of 2020, let's see, their 2020 budget was $721.5 billion, not million. That's with a B. That's every year they get that money. I don't know the exact amount of what the Inspector General's office gets, but it is ridiculous how much money the Department of Defense spends and overspends, and so that's why they have billions of dollars in waste and fraud, and that's why they don't like having audits. And so considering how large the United States Department of Defense is, there's a reason why they really don't want their Inspector General to do their job. So being that they don't want the Inspector General to do their job because they perform audits, that's why they appoint people that they can control. So that's why you have a lot of cronies within these federal agencies. So I just wanted to correct myself there because I was misquoting their budget. And yeah, kind of shocking how much they waste and spend, and it's not always a pleasant thing. But let's dive into the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Again, we've talked about their law enforcement, but we have not talked about the actual agency. So the preceding agency for this one is called the Bureau of Fisheries. The jurisdiction is under the umbrella of the United States federal government, so you know their budget's going to be ridiculous, being that the federal government is really overweight and feeding at the trough. They're headquartered at Bailey's Crossroads, Virginia. That's kind of an interesting headquarters. They have way too many employees. They have 8,000 employees. Their annual budget, as of 2021, so these are monies that they are given no matter what. So this is just right off the bat, they're given this money. Their budget for 2021 was $1.584 billion. So it's $1.584 billion. So almost $1.6 billion they were given for the year of 2021. That is excessive and ridiculous. They do have a director and they have a principal deputy director as well. And that last directorship is currently vacant. So I guess they're saving us a little money, not much. But it says here the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, also known as USFWS, again, they love to abbreviate because they like to feel special, is an agency of the United States federal government within the United States Department of the Interior dedicated to the management of fish, wildlife, and national habitats. The mission of the agency is, quote, working with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. Yeah, almost at $1.6 billion a year. It shouldn't cost that much to handle fish and wildlife. I find this to be ridiculous. I mean, if they need help understanding how to do their job, they can easily go back to school and study biology and zoology, and I'm sure that they will be more educated in that manner. They can maybe also study museum studies because museum studies strangely also covers archaeology. So you learn a lot about animals of times past because whenever you know history, it definitely helps you with your future, which is another reason why we go over these things. It says among the responsibilities of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service are enforcing federal wildlife laws, protecting endangered species. Now sometimes that gets a little excessive. I am in favor of protecting species, but sometimes they get so extreme that it's ridiculous. Managing migratory birds, restoring nationally significant fisheries, conserving and restoring wildlife habitats such as wetlands, helping foreign governments and international conservation efforts. We shouldn't be doing that. That's not our problem. We are not responsible for the planet's habitat. That's ridiculous. That's probably where a lot of this money is going, if not waste and fraud and overspending. It says, and distributing money to fish and wildlife agencies of the United States through the Wildlife Sport Fish and Restoration Program. Well, that's probably a honeypot for them. That's probably where everybody's got their hand in the pie, and that's probably why there's such a big problem. Okay, so it says the vast majority of fish and wildlife habitats are on state or private land not controlled by the United States government. Well, that's very interesting because the federal government has been trying to take away lands from private citizens, whether through this agency, but specifically through the EPA. So this is where big government gets too big for its britches and it tries to confiscate properties illegally from private citizens. That is a problem. And so if you are a citizen that is having to deal with that, you need to report that to your attorney general within your state and your state prosecutor. And also you need to recognize that you have citizens' rights as a federal citizen, but also you have states' rights. So do look into that if you're having to deal with these nuts that think that they can just take your land because they found a spore or a lizard or a gnat on your property that they want to save. So just FYI, there are other options. It says, therefore, the USFWS works closely with private groups such as Partners in Flight and the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council to promote voluntary habitat conservation and restoration. So basically, it's almost like you either volunteer to do it or we will force you to do it. It's basically what this is like. So this is why this agency is too big and too powerful. And their budget should be cut down to like $1 million, not $1 billion. This is ridiculous. The agency's, I was going to say dictatorship. The directorship currently is vacant. And let's see, they talk a little bit about who President Joe Biden appointed. Let's see here. Let me move on to, they employ approximately 8,000 people and is organized into a central administrative office in Falls Church, Virginia. Let's see here. They have 8 regional offices and nearly 700 field offices distributed throughout the United States. I'm really surprised they have that many field offices considering they have 8,000 people. It's just kind of weird looking to look at that to see the statistical data of that. In terms of the National Wildlife Refuge System, it says the USFWS manages the National Wildlife Refuge System, which consists of 560 national wildlife refuges, encompassing a full range of habitat types, including wetlands, prairies, coastal and marine areas, and temperate tundra and forest spread across all 50 United States. It also manages thousands of small wetlands and other special management areas covering over, that's going to be like 150 million acres. So, what's interesting is the more property you allow the government to control, the more they want to take what you have. So you need to be careful about that. And they'll use, any excuse to take your property, wildlife, the environment, the EPA, going green, carbon footprint, this, that. You have every right to fight this. In terms of, I guess they have the I'm just going to say their name. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service governs 6 national monuments. I didn't know this. So the first one is the Hanford Reach National Monument in Washington State. The next one I can't pronounce. It looks like Papa Hanaumokia Marine National Monument. It's a huge maritime area in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Oh, that's why no one can pronounce that name. It's still the island language. Okay. It's managed jointly with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the state of Hawaii. And the state of Hawaii is very liberal and progressive, so that's why they have names that they don't care to change that can actually be pronounced. And it's also why they think they should get a bunch of money from the federal government. They use other people's money. Then we have the Aleutian Islands, World War II National Monument in the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. My apologies if I mispronounced that word. I haven't seen it before. The next one that they manage or govern is the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, the largest marine protected area in the world, managed in constellation with NOAA. Then we have the Rose Atoll Marine National Monument in American Samoa, and it's also managed jointly with NOAA and the government of American Samoa. The last one that they govern is the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument, which includes undersea mud volcanoes, vents, chemosynthetic organisms, and many of the deepest points on Earth, managed in coordination again with NOAA and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. So very interesting there. In terms of endangered species, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service shares the responsibility for administering the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which we'll take a look at that. They share that responsibility with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and it's part of NOAA. And let's see here, with the NMFS responsible for marine species, the Fish and Wildlife Service responsible for freshwater fish and all other species, and the two organizations jointly managing services that occur in both marine and non-marine environments. They also, let's see here, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service also publishes the Quarterly Endangered Species Bulletin. We'll take a look at that later and see how much they try and convince people that we have a bigger problem than we actually do. We have the National Fish Hatchery System. It says here, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service's fisheries program oversees the National Fish Hatchery System, also known as NFHS. Again, they love abbreviations, which includes 70 national fish hatcheries and 65 fish and wildlife conservation offices. Originally created to reverse declines in lake and coastal fish stocks in the United States. Let's see here, the National Fish Hatchery System subsequently expanded its mission to include the preservation of the genes of wild and hatchery-raised fish, the restoration of native aquatic populations of fish, freshwater, mussels, and amphibians, including populations of species listed under the Endangered Species Act, mitigating the loss of fisheries resulting from U.S. government water projects, and providing fish to benefit Native Americans and national wildlife refuges. Let's see, the NFHS also engages in outreach, education, and research activities. Basically, they're wasting your money because I never really hear about them very much. So the fact that they say they are involved in outreach, education, and research, and yet I don't ever hear of them, tells me either A, they don't do a very good job, they don't care to do a good job, and they're just wasting our money. Next is the Migratory Bird Program. It says the Division of Migratory Bird Management runs the Migratory Bird Program, which works with partners of the USFWS to protect, restore, and conserve bird populations and their habitats by ensuring the long-term ecological sustainability of all migratory bird populations, increasing the socio-economic benefit of birds, improving the experience of hunting, bird watching, and other outdoor activities related to birds, and increasing the awareness of the aesthetic, ecological, recreational, and economic significance of migratory birds and their habitats. It conducts surveys, coordinates USFWS activities with those of public-private bird conservation partnerships, provides matching grants for conservation efforts involving USFWS partners. That's where there's a lot of waste and fraud, I guarantee it. Develops policies and regulations and administers conservation laws related to migratory birds, issues permits to allow individuals and organizations to participate in migratory bird conservation efforts. I just want to mention here, Mexico doesn't care to do that, and they are actually killing off a large portion of their birds that actually fly up to the United States. And the reason why Mexico is doing this is because they have farmers down there that they allow Americans and Europeans to travel to their land and basically camp out or, stay at a resort type facility and then go out and shoot and kill a whole bunch of birds, and they overhunt. This has been happening in Mexico for a long time, but no one holds Mexico accountable. They just try and blame the United States. Well, good luck with that. It says here they also help educate and engage children in wildlife conservation topics and provides resources for parents and educators to assist them in helping children explore nature and birds. Basically a waste of money. We have a lot of self-entitled kids that are growing up, and they really don't operate real well in regular everyday life. They don't understand what it means to be a good citizen, and they basically grow up and become these crazy liberal nutbags, and they don't understand the United States. They don't understand democracy, capitalism, or freedom, but yet supposedly they care about the environment. It's like, well, if you don't have a country, or if your country is screwed up, the environment to which you live in is not really going to matter because your country is corrupt. So that's why we need to make sure that we're not just making it all about the kids all the time. And I am for kids. I love children, but I live here in the Bible Belt, and it's like there's kind of this common trend right now that's been going on for a while that everybody's like, oh, we got to do it for the kids. Everything we do, we got to do it for the kids. It's like, no, like when you make it all about kids, you spoil them. They're spoiled rotten, and they are very much entitled, and then adults get ignored. So, I don't think that's really panned out very well. I think kids need to be raised to be self-sufficient. And whenever these people make it all about the kids, these kids are far from being self-sufficient. They are weak-minded, very intolerant people. It's really bizarre. But moving on, talking about the landscape conservation cooperatives. The USFWS partners with the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, a network of 22 autonomous cooperatives sponsored by the Department of the Interior, which functions as regional conservation bodies covering the entire United States and adjacent areas. So basically, probably a lot of money is going down the tubes with that one as well. Let me get a drink of water. Hold on just a moment. Whenever you see the word cooperative, you need to think about money being poured down a rat hole and there not being accountability. That's been my experience, even in the private sector. You have to be concerned about stuff like that. We've already talked about their law enforcement, so I'm not going to go into that. There is a National Fish and Wildlife Forensic Laboratory. This department operates the Clark-Bavin National Fish and Wildlife Forensic Laboratory, the only forensics laboratory in the world devoted to wildlife enforcement. By treaty, it also is the official crime laboratory for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora and the Wildlife Group of Interpol. The laboratory identifies the species or subspecies of pieces, parts, or products of an animal to determine its cause of death, help wildlife officers determine if a violation of law occurred in its death, and to identify and compare physical evidence to link suspects to the crime scene and the animal's death. I think that's actually a really good thing to do because I've mentioned this in times past. Here in Oklahoma, we've been having a huge problem with the Chinese coming into Oklahoma, and they hire basically stupid farmers and people that are poor here in Oklahoma, basically out in the sticks, and they overhunt our turtles because turtles and turtle meat is considered a very expensive delicacy in China. So they've been overhunting our turtle population here in Oklahoma, and it has been dwindling. So we have officers, I think, within our fish and wildlife departments within the state of Oklahoma that have been trying to fight these people that are unlawfully hunting in Oklahoma by the thousands. Like they literally steal thousands of turtles from our habitats and from the wildlife that we have out in nature, so to speak, and they put them in these huge Tupperware tubs and they ship them to China. Because, these poor farmers here, and I don't mean poor farmers as in feel sorry for them, I mean like they are financially strained and not very successful, so they're willing to do anything that is even unlawful to make money. So, very ignorant people, they shouldn't do that. So next we're going to talk about the International Affairs Program. It says the USFWS International Affairs Program coordinates domestic and international efforts to protect, restore, and enhance wildlife and its habitats, focusing on species of international concern, fulfilling the USFWS's international responsibilities under the 40 treaties, as well as U.S. laws and regulations. So basically, a lot of our money in this department is going down the rat hole because we are on the hook on an international level, and we should not be. We are not the world's piggy bank, but a lot of people view us as their personal piggy bank, especially socialist countries like Canada, Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Australia, and possibly New Zealand. It oversees programs which work with private citizens, local communities, other U.S. government and U.S. state agencies, foreign governments, non-governmental organizations, scientific and conservation organizations, industry groups, and other interested parties on issues related to the implementation of treaties and laws and the conservation of species found in the world, basically. So here's the thing. Do you really think the rest of the planet is going to do their part when, most other countries are pretty terrible? The United States is a world superpower for a reason. It's because we do things right. We have capitalism, we have democracy, and we have freedom. There is no other country on the face of this earth that compares to the United States. Now here's the thing, these other countries, all they have to do is turn over a new leaf and start doing things right and do exactly what the United States does, so that way they have a better country and have a more stable economy, but they don't care to do that because of crime and corruption, socialism, fascism, and communism. I mean, take your pick. So needless to say, why would these countries that don't behave right and are very much fraudulent in their business affairs, what makes you think they're going to care to do what's right even with endangered species? All they're going to do is say, oh, we care. Yeah, we will definitely coordinate with you. And all they do is use us for money. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water. Hold on just a moment. Like basically, I kind of look at it this way. Let's say an ex-con gets out of prison. Do you really expect them to not ever go back to their way of life? That's basically, whenever you're looking at these countries that are corrupt, like you're basically asking a criminal to stop stealing. Good luck with that. So, not exactly the best thing. Let's see here. In terms of tribal relations, I'm not real familiar with this, but it says pursuant to the eagle feather law. I've never heard of this. Oh, wait a second. I've heard about this in regards to overhunting eagles. I'm not aware of the eagle feather law, but I do know about eagles and tribes here in Oklahoma, and you have to be careful about hunting eagles, and if you shoot one, especially by accident, you have to be careful about these things. And basically, Indians are basically the only ones that can kill eagles, so that way they can still continue to practice their pagan religion, which, I don't think that they should be allowed to kill animals, just to practice their religion or have their culture. I just think that's wrong. We should not be okay with pagan religions taking place, because it's not right. I feel like I'm stepping on eggshells with that one. But at the same time, it's just one of those things like we are a Christian nation. We are one nation under God. We are not wickets. We are not pagans. We are not tribal. And, our money says in God we trust. Well, if you're practicing a pagan religion, then you are not trusting God. So that, needs to say, is a problem. And pagan religions very much brainwash children. And they are very horrible to women. And a lot of them are cults. So this is why we should not be practicing any of those religions whatsoever. And they should not be given permission to do what they want whenever they want. That has been a problem here in Oklahoma for sure. Pursuant to the Eagle Feather Law, Title 50, Part 22 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, which we will take a look at that, the USFWS administers the National Eagle Repository and the permit system for Native American religious use of eagle feathers. I don't think they should be allowed to do that. These exceptions often only apply to Native Americans. They play favoritism. That's not the American way. These exceptions often only apply to Native Americans that are registered with the federal government and are enrolled with a federally recognized tribe. So here's the thing. We should not be recognizing tribes because the United States is one country. When you recognize these tribes as like a federal entity is what I mean. I'm not saying that tribes don't exist. They do. That is their culture. That is their heritage. But they should not be recognized on a federal level because now all these exceptions to the rule are granted to them, and there's a lot of waste and fraud within these tribes that no one wants to talk about. So it is a problem because there's so much corruption within Indian tribes. It's ridiculous. Let me put it this way: the IRS would have a field day with the audits and the books and the bank accounts of tribes. They would just have a field day with it because there's a lot that they don't do right. And they very much think they don't have to do things lawfully or legally because they're recognized as a federal tribe. That's probably a big problem there. Let me get a drink of water. So it says here, in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service began to incorporate the research of tribal scientists into conservation decisions. I think that's a mistake because they're going to be slanted on one side. They're going to be jaded, and they're going to have not a very good opinion of the United States. Let's see here. It says here, I'm going to skip that next sentence because it doesn't read right. But it talks basically about their agriculture and things like that. And so I think it's just one way to give certain people that are elitist permission to do what they want, especially scientists, and I think you have to be careful with that. In terms of the history of this organization, of the Fish Commission and Bureau of Fisheries, it says the original name for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service was the United States Commission on Fish and Fisheries, more commonly referred to as the United States Fish Commission. It was created in 1871 by the United States Congress with the purpose of studying and recommending solutions to a noted decline in the stocks of food fish. Spencer Fullerton Bard was appointed to lead it as the first United States Commissioner of Fisheries. In 1903, the Fish Commission was reorganized as the United States Bureau of Fisheries and made part of the United States Department of Commerce and Labor. Very interesting there. When the Department of Commerce and Labor was split into the United States Department of Commerce and the United States Department of Labor in 1913, the Bureau of Fisheries was made part of the Department of Commerce. Originally focused on fisheries, science, and fish culture, the Bureau of Fisheries also assumed other duties. In 1906, the United States Congress assigned it the responsibility for the enforcement of fishery and fur seal hunting regulations in the territory of Alaska because they were overhunting up there. Even farmers and tribal people and people that are native to those areas, they were overhunting. So just because someone is Native American or a villager or a farmer or agriculture, whatever the case may be, that doesn't mean they actually understand the ecosystem. Because there are many instances where tribal people, villagers, and people native to the area, sometimes they deplete their own natural resources. So it's not just big corporations that do this. It's also the local people that do this as well. It says here in 1910, so let me back up. So Congress assigned it the responsibility of the enforcement of fishery and fur seal hunting regulations in the territory of Alaska, and in 1910 for the management and harvest of northern fur seals, foxes, and other fur-bearing animals in the, I think it's Pribilof Islands, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, as well as for the care, education, and welfare of the Inuit communities in the islands. I apologize if I am mispronouncing that. In 1939, the Bureau of Fisheries moved from the Department of Commerce to the Department of the Interior. I think that's good because fisheries, it's not a, there is commerce in it, but the Department of the Interior, I think, would be better for that. We're going to skip over talking about, going into detail about their surveys. They do have different types of surveys. They have different departments. So they have the Division of Economic, I think it's ornithology and mammalogy, if that's basically study of mammals. And then they have the Division of Biological Survey. And then now they have the Bureau of Biological Surveys as well. And then it says here on June 30th, 1940, the Bureau of Fisheries and the Bureau of Biological Survey were combined to form the Department of the Interior's Fish and Wildlife Service. In 1956, the Fish and Wildlife Service was reorganized as the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which remained part of the Department of the Interior and divided its operations into two bureaus. The Bureau of Sport, Fisheries, and Wildlife, and then the second one is the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, with the latter inheriting the history and heritage of the old U.S. Fish Commission and U.S. Bureau of Fisheries. Upon the formation of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, within the Department of Commerce on October 3, 1970, the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries merged with the saltwater laboratories of the Bureau of Sport, Fisheries, and Wildlife to form today's National Marine Fisheries Service, an element of NOAA. So then talking a little bit about their fleet, from 1940 to 1970, the FWS operated a fleet of seagoing vessels. The fleet included fisheries science research ships, fishery patrol vessels, and cargo liners. So I'm not going to go into great detail about that because it changes over time about the different boats and vessels that they have. And obviously, as the department grows, their fleet grows. What's interesting is that It says here both before and after the FWS became the USFWS in 1956, ships of its fleet used the prefix USFWS while in commission. So they're basically aligning themselves together. And so then it says here's a partial list of ships of the FWS and the USFWS. So they have the Albatross the third, that was a research vessel. Let's see here, you have the Albatross the fourth, a research vessel. You have the Auklet, Auklet, that's a patrol vessel. You have the Blue Wing, that's a patrol vessel. And some of these are still used, others are not. The ones I just mentioned I don't think are still used per se because it's not giving me a timeline. You have a vessel that's called, it's a patrol vessel, it's called Brant. And that was used from 1926 to 1940 and then used from 1940 to 1953. You have the Brown Bear, that was a research vessel. It was used by the Bureau of Biological Survey from 1934 to 1940 and then used by FWS from 1940 to 1942. And then it was used again from 1965 to 1970. And then used again from 1970 to 1972. Then you have the Charles H. Gilbert. That was a research vessel. It was used from 1952 to 1970 and then used by NOAA from 1970 to 1973. Then you have the patrol vessel called Crane, CRANA. That one was used from 1928 to 1940. Then again from 1940 to 1960. And the reason why there are two different time periods typically that they use these vessels is because of the changing of the name of the department and the agency. And when they merge and split, very much like a labor union there. Then you have the David Starr Jordan research vessel. That one was used from 1966 to 1970. Then from 1970 to 2010. Then you have the Delaware II. That was a research vessel. It was used from 1968 to 1970. Then again from 1970 to 2012. Then you have the Dennis Wynn. That one was, I think it's a Pribilof tender and cargo liner. It was used from 1940 to 1960. Then you have the Eider, EIDER. It was a tender and patrol vessel. It was utilized from 1919 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1942. Then from 1946 and let's see, the late 1940s as well. It doesn't give me an exact date of when they stopped using it. Then you have the George B. Calise. That one is a research vessel. It was used from 1962 to 1970, then again from 1970 to 1980. You have the Henry O'Malley research vessel. It was used from 1949 to 1951. Then you have the Hughes M. Smith research vessel. It was used from 1949 to 1959. Then you have the John N. Cobb research vessel. It was used from 1950 to 1970, then from 1970 to 2008. Then you have the Joseph R. Manning research vessel. It was used from 1950 to 1969. Then you have the Kittiwake patrol vessel. It was used from 1919 to 1940, then from 1940 to the late 1940s. Then you have the, I think it's called Merganser. That was a patrol vessel. It was used from 1919 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1942, then 1942 to 1943. Then you have the Miller Freeman research vessel. It was used from 1967 to 1970. Then it was used from 1975 to 2013. Then you have the Murray or Murray, M-U-R-R-E. It was a patrol vessel that was used from 1917 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1942. Let's see here. You have the Murray or Murray the second. It's a research vessel. Let's see, it was used from 1949 to 1970. Then 1970 to 1989. Then you have the Oregon research vessel used from 1956 to 1970. Then from 1970 to 1980. Then you have the Pelican. It's a research and patrol vessel. It was used from 1930 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1958. Then it was used from 1970 to 1972. Then you have the Penguin. It was a Pribilof tender boat. I'm not sure how I pronounce that. It was used from 1930 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1950. Excuse me, losing my voice a little bit. Then we have the Penguin the Second. It was a Pribilof tender vessel as well. It was utilized from 1950 to 1963. Then you have the Pribilof tender, another one. Let's see here. It was used from 1963 to 1970. Then from 1970 to 1975. Then you have the Scoter, Scoter. That one was a patrol vessel. It was used from 1922 to 1940. Then from 1940 to 1949. Then you have the Teal. It's a patrol vessel. It was used from 1928 to 1940. Let's see here. Then from 1940 to 1960. Then you have the Townsend Cromwell. It was a research vessel. It was utilized from 1964 to 1965. Sorry, take that back. 1964 to 1975. Then from 1975 to 2002. Last one is the Widgeon or Widgeon, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Widgeon. It's a patrol vessel. It was utilized from 1919 to 1940, then from 1940 to 1945. So very interesting culture there in that they use a lot of money, almost $1.6 billion a year. But what I find very interesting is they have all these boats and they have all this stuff that they use for long periods of time, but it's like they're not keeping up with the times. So that concerns me with that, for sure. And later on, we will go over different governmental agencies that are related to this one. And then we will go over the different regulatory matters that intersect with this agency. Like, for example, you have the Coastal Barrier Resources Act. I think we've talked a little bit about the Endangered Species Act. Then we have the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, the Lacey Act. Then you have the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, National Wetlands Inventory, National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act of 1966. You have the Sykes Act. That sounds fake. Interesting names there. Then you have the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. And then you have the Wild Bird Conservation Act of 1992. So very interesting there. This is interesting. There's a court docket listed here. It says Sierra Club versus Babbitt. Sierra Club is a very tyrannical, liberal left group. I think they came about in the 60s or 70s, and they were very much extreme environmentalism, so much so that it makes it very difficult to buy property because they just get very invasive in terms of environmentalism. So we will go over that because I remember my mom talking about the Sierra Club and how it started for good reasons and good purposes, but then it got really weird and really progressive. Because again, there was an outcry from the public in America about things going on in the environment that are endangering the environment, and it's harming and hurting people as well as the wildlife. And so one of the reasons why President Richard Nixon consolidated so many government agencies and created the EPA was because there was an outcry from the public about, hey, these different federal agencies that are supposed to be helping, they are so uncoordinated and they're not working well with each other, and so we've got these problems out here. And so that's why President Richard Nixon, who, mind you, again, was a Republican president, why he created the Environmental Protection Agency, it was because there was a need for it. What's interesting is that, just because we have a need for something, that doesn't mean that we give our government permission to be tyrannical in their federal legislation and their laws several decades later. And that is exactly what has happened with the EPA and the Department of the Interior, the Department of Defense, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Services. All you have to do is take a look at their budget. We're talking billions of dollars. And so, that's very concerning that our tax dollars are going towards federal agencies that have a huge and tremendous problem with waste and fraud. But yet, if private sector companies were to have billions of dollars in waste and fraud, somebody's going to jail. That's just how it is in the private sector. Because prosecutors are quick to lock up people from the private sector, but they're not quick to lock up their own. And I think that's very unfortunate because, the law applies to everybody equally. There is no favoritism. And there is no nepotism. But unfortunately, whenever you get these large federal agencies and, they get billions of dollars a year, why would they care to stop when they've been getting away with so much for so long? And that's not a conspiracy theory. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I'm just looking at the facts. When I see billions of dollars going down a rat hole, and I don't see that our government has actually done its job and done it well, then I have to think, okay, what are they actually spending the money on, and how can we make things better? Because I do think we I would say for the most part, we do need these federal agencies. It's just they're not being run right. So again, one of the reasons why they are not being run right is because they have been run by bad people, and the reason why is because you get incompetent leaders, they appoint or nominate incompetent people. So this is a tremendous problem. But anyway, I will go ahead and end this podcast. Happy Friday to you. But as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. God bless and bye-bye. Oh, I want to mention this. Hold on a second. I want to mention something positive for you guys to take a look at. When you are on YouTube, I want you to check out a very positive video about Christian faith. And, because I know sometimes I talk about in my podcast that I'm not always a fan of how people behave in their Christianity, because I am a Christian, but I've met some hypocrites over the years, and they're a dime a dozen in any religion. But if you want to know how to have really good, strong faith and to really believe in the goodness of God, you need to watch some videos of Charles Capps. He was an amazing preacher, and I'm going to look up one of his videos and give you one of the titles of one of them, because he was so good. Like, he just says it like it is. He doesn't hold back, and he calls people out on their stupid stuff in churches. One really good video I came across of Charles Capps is called The Authority of the Believer. So if you are a Christian and you believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, or maybe you were a Christian but you don't believe anymore, you need to watch that video, because we are one nation under God. And what's interesting is that wherever you have Christianity, there is way more freedom. People are way more successful. But whenever there's not Christianity, or if it's forbidden, like for example in China and these communist countries, all you have is corruption and dictatorships, and that's very awful. You need to recognize that having faith is very important. And you need to hear from someone who knows what they're talking about. And this guy, he was a farmer for a long time. And then he heard the good word, so to speak. He was very much a Christian before he became a preacher himself. But, what's interesting is that it matters what someone says to you, and it matters what you believe. So what I really like about his videos, and I think this recording goes back to the late 70s or early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Really good message, very powerful, even for today's Christians. I've said this in times past, I was raised in a Wrath of God church. I mean, it was like everybody's going to hell, and I'm just like, this is horrible. Well, that's not what God says. So what's nice about, hearing, how to describe this? Basically, when you hear the truth about God's holy word is what I'm trying to say. You need to look up Charles Capps and look at the authority of the believer. Because a lot of churches that browbeat Christians, they want us to believe that we don't have authority over anything. Well, all you're doing is inviting trouble into your life when you're doing that. Like when you think that you're no good, you're just a worm, God doesn't love you, He can't wait to throw you into the fiery pits of hell. Okay, all that stuff is a lie straight out of the depths of hell, because when you read the Bible is a love letter from God to us about how much He loves mankind, and we were created in His image. It's interesting, as I know from being raised in a cult, that it sucks hearing the wrong kind of message. So I want to make sure that anyone and everyone that's listening to this podcast and going forward, at the end of all my podcasts, I'm going to suggest a video to watch, just kind of supplement material to go along with this. It's very important to know who you are in Christ Jesus, because when you don't believe in God and you don't know who you are in Christ Jesus, then you really don't know how to help yourself, your community, or your country. And I think that's why some people look to government to solve their problems. So then they institutionalize socialism and communism because they have tried to take God off the throne and put government there, and you can't do that. And that's why socialism doesn't work, communism does not work, and that's why fascism does not work, because you are making government your God. You know, it's really a horrible thing to make government your God, because government, its purpose is not to be your God. Its purpose is to be run by the people of that country. So that's how you have a checks and balance system of your government. And what's interesting is that with the United States, we are one nation under God. We are a Christian nation, but if they don't understand their faith, or they've been raised wrong, like for example me, I was raised in a cult, unfortunately, my sister and I, when you're raised wrong, it really screws you up, especially for the first 18 years of your life. And, what's really sad is that when people that you love and respect, when they believe in something that's very hateful and wicked, and it's like, okay, I can't believe that. I can't believe in something that goes against, basically the goodness of God, because God is not a hater. God loves mankind. And, and this planet belongs to us. And here's the thing, I find that when they know who they are in Christ Jesus, and they know that they're in the palm of God's hand, they know that's very important to be a good steward of this planet. So then when we know that it's important for us as individuals, okay, having, self-reliance and being accountable for what we do and what we don't do, then we all care, or we're supposed to care about what we do with the planet that God has given us. So, whenever we take on that responsibility, then we don't have waste and fraud from agencies like this that spend well over $1.5 billion a year. See, whenever you pass responsibility that God gave you onto somebody else, you can always expect problems to occur. Always. So please don't miss the opportunity to, first of all, believe in God, have faith, know who you are in Christ Jesus, and don't ever miss the opportunity to be blessed. And here's the thing, you cannot be blessed, in a socialist country. You cannot be blessed with socialism, communism, or fascism because, your government is your God. And I think a lot of people on this planet are suffering from that. And, what's interesting is that there are so many religious leaders and just leaders in general. Let me get a drink of water. Hold on just a moment. There's so many leaders on this planet that they don't want people to be Christians and they don't want them to read the Bible. And that's why so many very evil, wicked countries that practice communism, that's why they close churches. Like worse than what happened during COVID-19, like they permanently closed churches. And Christians in these really bad and scary countries, Christians, they have to practice their faith underground, basically. Because if they get caught worshiping the one true God, they can go to prison forever and or be executed. Because really evil, wicked governments know that if people figure out that government is not their God, then the people will take their government back. They will take their country back. So that way they can have a better life. See, that's what happened when the Soviet Union fell. The people had had enough and they wanted their country back. So for sure, check out Charles Capp's Authority of the Believer. And going forward at the end of every episode, I'm going to mention a really good video that you should watch. And I'm just going to tell you straight up, if you're listening in from California or from the northeastern part of the United States, you're going to hear different accents. Some people in these videos might be from Arkansas, some might be from Texas, some might be from Oklahoma. Sometimes it takes some time for your ears to get acclimated to the accent. But here's the thing, I have found that whenever someone is speaking with an accent, it makes me listen more attentively because the way they talk is so different. So do listen to the message, be blessed, and believe in the goodness of God. Thank you so much, and again, God bless, bye-bye, have a wonderful week.